Greenwich, England, the heart of a nation built on sea power, and home to a museum with secrets dark and strange. The mark of Horatio Nelson's deadly assassin, the magical bullet of Captain William Bligh, the final hours of Sir John Franklin's Arctic expedition, and a deadly device that foiled an empire. Secrets hidden in plain sight inside the National Maritime Museum, Greenwich. Just east of central London, on the banks of the Thames River, is Greenwich, home to the National Maritime Museum. The museum's collection celebrates Great Britain's proud seafaring heritage, which dates back almost 1,000 years. Through exploration, innovation, and conflict, the Royal Navy led Britain's conquest of the seas and became a breeding ground for heroes, from the famous to the infamous. From Sir John Franklin to William Bligh, captain of the ill-fated Bounty, but none was greater than this man, Admiral Horatio Nelson.
Horatio Nelson was born in 1758. He joined the Navy when he was a 12-year-old boy.
Nelson rose through the ranks to Vice Admiral and wore this uniform during his finest hour, the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, one of Britain's most legendary naval victories.
Nelson wasn't just a British celebrity during his lifetime. He actually enjoyed enormous European fame because he was seen to be one of the most potent adversaries of Napoleon that Europe had to offer.
But Nelson's jacket clearly shows that his finest hour was also his last. On the left shoulder is the entry point of a fatal bullet that killed Britain's great hero. Naval historian Sam Willis takes us onto the deck of HMS Victory, Admiral Nelson's flagship from the Battle of Trafalgar, and the scene of his death.
Nelson would have been down here on the quarterdeck during the battle, absolutely in the thick of things, with smoke clouding the view, with cannons roaring. Splinters would have been flying everywhere. Very dangerous place to be.
The charge towards the center of Napoleon's fleet brought the Victory into close contact with the French ship, Redoutable.
This is where the Redoutable was, and her rigging was locked together with the Victory's rigging. Her guns were so close to the Victory's hull that they were actually touching the hull. And as well as these masked men on the Redoutable's decks, there were snipers in her rigging. And it was at that moment, at this spot, that Nelson was struck. He immediately knew that he'd been hit very badly. He said, "I think they've broken my back."
He was carried 4 decks below to the surgery.
It was very dark, it was very grim. There would have been sounds of screaming and dying men. And the bullet had gone in through his shoulder. It had broken 2 ribs, it had punctured a lung, and then it had lodged itself in his spine. And as he lay there, he said he felt a pulsing in his chest, and the bullet had cut one of his arteries.
Surrounded by his loyal crew, Nelson died 3 hours later. Who fired the fatal shot? For decades, many stories arose about who the man behind the bullet could have been, including one report from a Frenchman who claimed it was his shot that killed Nelson, fired from the rigging of the Redoutable.
He took 4 bullets with him, and he said, "If I don't kill Nelson with 3 of these bullets, I'm going to use the last one to kill myself." When you hear that account, the first thing that strikes you is it's not possible, really. It's like someone trying to grab their own piece of fame, trying to put their own stamp on history.
So are we to believe this French account? Was Britain's greatest war hero the target of a skilled marksman? Or was he simply the victim of a random gunshot? This is our museum's secret.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, Sam.
Thank you very much for coming along.
Sam Willis has enlisted the help of artillery expert Ian Henn, who has brought a replica French musket with him. Unlike the rifles of later decades, this musket is not the ideal weapon for precise target shooting.
The balls are not exactly spherical. They didn't always come out the centre of the barrel of the musket. They may have come out of the top, the bottom, or one side, and that would have affected where they would have ended up on target.
I think the first thing we should do is test the accuracy of these muskets. What do we need?
If I grab the musket, if you grab a tape measure, we'll measure out and see what we can get on with.
Well, here's our Nelson dummy. We know he was a bit shorter than this, but it'll do for our purposes.
It will do, yes.
We won't fit a thing.
Let's measure and see how far away we can do it.
Ian will try a close-range shot at just 10 meters from the target.
So all we need to do now is to pull the gun back to full cock, and it's ready to fire.
Right. Think you got him?
I think we got him, yes.
There.
There we go, look.
And were you aiming for the sort of the main
Well, I was
chest?
aiming for the main torso.
Yeah.
You see, with a smoothbore musket, you do have accuracy problems. You don't know where it's going to come out of the bore.
Even at close range, the musket isn't that accurate. And on the day of the battle, the shot would have been considerably more complicated. It's been calculated that Nelson was standing 16 meters away from the base of the mizzenmast of the French ship at the moment he was shot.
16 metres there in
16
your hand.
metres, so that's here. Let's wave the truck back.
And the shooter was 15 meters up the mast.
That's much higher than I thought.
OK.
How are you doing? That is 15 metres off the ground. That's the height of the Redoutable's mizzenmast. From down there, it looked incredibly high. But from here, it's surprisingly close, bearing in mind that that's an enemy ship. That's going to be rigging full of enemy soldiers.
In the chaos of battle, cannons would be firing, and gunpowder smoke would be wafting across the ship's decks. Sam wants to factor that into the equation, too.
I think he hit the mannequin. Unbelievably, he shot him in the left shoulder. That's absolutely amazing. So even with the noise and the smoke of the cannon, he's managed to shoot him on the left shoulder, just below the epaulette, exactly where Nelson was shot, which is an extraordinary shot, and it's completely not what I expected to happen.
Ian's bullet has gone right through the dummy, penetrating the center of the back, where the spine would be.
It's extraordinarily similar what's happened here. If you compare what happened with Nelson with what we've managed to recreate from the angles, from the distance and from the height. We need to rethink that moment of Nelson's death and to consider the fact that he was deliberately targeted by a French marksman.
The French shot was heard around the world. And with the death of a national hero, a legend was born. Admiral Nelson was immortalized in British memory and continues to command from his pedestal on high over Trafalgar Square. Next on Museum Secrets, a deadly infernal machine. Hidden away in the storerooms of the National Maritime Museum lie surprising mementos of Britain's fighting past. These are the naval weapons that helped Britain rule the waves. But in the 19th century, the Royal Navy faced a new kind of weapon, a hidden threat that lurked beneath the surface of the ocean.
This is the Russian infernal machine. It's a sea mine from the time of the Crimean War. And as you can see, this one has been taken by the British as a war trophy and has been painted up, Russian infernal machine, Baltic, 1855.
Sea mines have been a threat to warships going back to the Chinese in the 14th century. And they continue to represent a significant threat today. Marine mines filled with TNT are now computerized and fitted with electronic fuses for remote or automatic detonation. They are capable of colossal explosions. Naval mines present such a danger that there are entire fleets devoted to finding and defusing them. This is HMS Chiddingfold, one of 15 Royal Navy minehunter vessels. All minehunters carry ROVs, remote operated vehicles, equipped with cameras that allow minehunters to get a good look at the mine from a safe distance and defuse it or destroy it. In the 19th century, naval mines and the methods used to deal with them were considerably less sophisticated. If they were identified and fished out of the water intact, these new weapons were treated with equal parts caution and curiosity. But as one newspaper report from the time illustrates, this curiosity got the better of one man in particular, Royal Naval Admiral Seymour.
Seymour, with his officers, was extremely interested in the device, so he whacked the side of the mine and it blew up, knocking back the officers, burning off their moustaches and their eyebrows, and poor Admiral Seymour was blinded in one eye as a result.
Back in the 1850s, mines were armed with gunpowder that had to be ignited without the use of electronics or batteries. So how did the Russian infernal machine work? And why did these men survive its blast? This is our museum's secret. The investigation begins in Wiltshire with chemist and explosives engineer Dr. Sidney Alford. Today, he's going to try to build a functioning Russian infernal machine for the first time.
There is something singularly bizarre about this mine, and it is its general shape. It is a cone. It is conical. Where it came from, I don't know.
No functioning infernal machine exists today. Sidney has only a few crude sketches from the period to work with.
My guess is that the gunpowder was introduced in the bottom through this fitting here. This serves, of course, you can see, to attach the rope. So the thing was designed to float, and by attaching this line where it is, it would automatically float vertically, go something like this in the sea.
So, bobbing just under the water, how is the Russian infernal machine designed to detonate?
If I were to hit it here, so this goes upwards...
Sidney might have the answer.
What is in this hole is the tube, which would have been almost certainly thin-walled metal, probably steel.
Inside this tube is a glass vial containing sulfuric acid. When the mine is struck by a ship, the vial breaks, releasing the acid into a chemical mixture just below it. This interaction creates a flame, igniting the gunpowder. Believing he's worked out the mechanics, Sidney has built a scale model to test his design.
Whoa.
This shallow pool represents a Russian harbor. This wooden dinghy, a British warship.
Right, electrical connection coming up.
In the interest of safety, Sidney is going to attempt to detonate the mine from several meters away.
That will cause the mine to dangle.
Placed just under the ship's hull, it will be in the same position as the original infernal machines that detonated on contact with ships passing over them.
I'm ready to fire. Firing. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Had I been a Russian, I would have been delighted with that result. Just hope it wasn't my own ships. Let's see what it's done to the boat. It has almost certainly perforated it. It's listing heavily. There's some material which is burning on fire, projected upwards. That was the top of the mine, which blew off, not surprisingly. And that is pretty catastrophic damage. Had it been a naval vessel and their magazine were there, where they keep their powder and shot and so on, were anywhere near, the whole thing, I think, would have quite disintegrated.
So why didn't the infernal machine that blew up in the face of Admiral Seymour and his men do more damage? Sidney thinks he knows why.
I would expect that much powder this close almost certainly to kill someone. And the thought occurred to me, I wonder whether it was a mine that was primed but had not yet had the explosive in.
Seymour's mine may have been primed with the chemical initiating substances, but not charged with gunpowder. An oversight by the Russians. A lucky escape for the British Admiral and his men. Up next, the secret of Captain Bligh's bullet. The National Maritime Museum is full of grand objects with towering stories to tell. But sometimes it's the smallest and simplest objects that tell the most epic stories.
These three objects belong to Captain William Bligh, who is, of course, famous as the captain of the Bounty, the ship involved in that infamous mutiny in 1789.
On the night of April 28, 1789, the crew of HMS Bounty mutinied against their iron-willed and controlling captain, William Bligh. They seized the ship and set Bligh adrift in an open boat along with 18 loyal followers. Bligh and his men were faced with a treacherous open boat voyage across the South Pacific.
47 days is an extraordinarily long time, over 3,600 miles. His men faced hunger, they faced thirst, they faced towering waves, they faced storms, they faced rain, and then they faced the real problem of all open boat survivors. They had to cope with each other as well.
Being sat in a tiny boat in a massive ocean that's in storm conditions is absolutely terrifying.
Chris Martin is a long-distance rower who has crossed both the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in boats the same size as Bligh's.
19 men in a boat the same size as ours, no cabin, no watertight compartment to go and hide in when the weather gets rough. I can't imagine what that would be like.
So how did Bligh deliver his men to safety with the help of a musket ball, a coconut shell, and a horn beaker? This is our museum's secret. The investigation begins in Portsmouth. To understand Bligh's ordeal, we must first get aboard his boat.
This is the Blue launch. She's a replica of a frigate's launch from the period. So she's exactly the same size as the boat that Bligh would have been put in. That's 23 feet. She would have been used for shipping crew and stores to and from a ship. So she's certainly not designed for a voyage of any significant length, and certainly not for a lot of people. So I think the first thing we need to do is see what it looks like with 19 men on board. Come on then, boys, let's get on. On you go first. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, number 17. And our own Captain Bligh, number 18. But we know there were 19 people on board, so I'm going to get on as well. It's starting to look and feel pretty cramped already. You can feel us settling down quite low to the water. And the idea of going on a 3,600-mile voyage in this is pretty horrific.
Give way! Together!
The problem we've got is space. We've got the mast here and the boom and the bowsprit here for the rigging. So the poor people in the middle keep getting poked in the ribs by the oars. So for them, it's quite uncomfortable.
The flat waters of Portsmouth Harbour are nothing compared to the giant swells of the Pacific.
We saw some really crazy weather conditions out in the Pacific, sort of 60-foot high waves, really aggressive storms blowing past.
One of the problems, of course, is shipping water from seas coming along, the swell breaking over the side of the boat. And we know that at one stage in his voyage, Bligh had to have 2 men constantly bailing, 24 hours a day.
And in an open boat, the threats come from both the sea and the sun.
In the Pacific, the ozone layer is quite thin, so the crew will have been exposed to extreme temperatures during the day and an extreme risk of heat stroke. Now, this would have had various effects on them in the form of hyperthermia. These will have included things like dizziness, confusion, nausea and vomiting, and just a general state of unease and agitation.
And adding to their agitation was their pitiful food supply.
So this is what Bligh was given to take with him. We've got 150 pounds of biscuits, 28 gallons of water, 20 pounds of salted pork, 6 coconuts, 3 bottles of red wine, 5 quarts of rum, and that was it. That was what they had to survive 47 days at sea.
This works out to 400 calories a day per man.
So can I have every...
On his Pacific row in 2009, Chris budgeted 5,000 calories a day. But after 4 months, he discovered that some of his food had become contaminated with seawater.
As the food ran out and became more contaminated, we then had to eat less and less. At the end, our last day, we had 200 calories of food. It's absolutely exhausting to be putting that much effort into physical exertion and not getting any food in to replace those lost calories.
Bligh and his men tried to supplement their supplies by stopping off on the island of Tonga. But they were quickly beaten off the island by the locals. One of the crewmen was stoned to death in the escape. Fearing further casualties, Bligh knew he had to control his men from turning on each other. And this brings us back to the musket ball, which holds the secret to their survival, serving not as a weapon, but as a weight.
So knowing the weight of the musket ball, Bligh was able to use this to measure out the bread ration that each man would receive twice a day.
The musket ball weighs less than an ounce.
So what we imagine is that Bligh would use a makeshift weighing scales, probably using coconut shells similar to this, the bullet in one and the meagre bread ration in the other. What they would do is to make up a terribly weak stew, perhaps of some shellfish or the tiny amount of dried pork that they've got on. They would mash their bread into it and add a little bit of seawater just to act as a sauce. So it is little wonder that Bligh writes around the rim of his cup, "This is the cup I eat my miserable ration out of." This is not cordon bleu cookery on the open waves.
Battling dehydration, Bligh also controlled the fresh water, giving his men 1/8 of a pint rationed from this beaker, 3 times a day. This was their only food and drink for over a month. 47 days after they were kicked off the Bounty by its mutineering crew, Bligh and 17 of his men reached the British colony of Timor. So how did Bligh manage to keep control of his crew under such extreme circumstances?
He'd managed it by his seamanship, he managed it by his leadership. He kept everyone together. And there are so many accounts of survivors in open boats absolutely falling apart in situations like this.
I think that the main reason that the crew survived was because of the discipline of Captain Bligh in rationing out the food and water so carefully. I think without that, they probably won't have survived.
It was Bligh's obsessive, controlling personality that turned his ship's crew to mutiny. But in the end, it was this same tough discipline that saved them all from certain death. Up next, the secret of fighting pirates. Britain's National Maritime Museum is filled with reminders of naval conflicts. From the American Revolutionary War to the Second World War. But one war would outlast them all. It began centuries ago, and remarkably, it's still going on today.
This is a presentation sword that was awarded to Lieutenant Robert Gore of the gunboat Andromache. And it was awarded to him in 1837 for action against the pirates in the Malacca Straits.
By the 1830s, the Straits of Malacca, a major trading route between India and China, had become a notorious hotspot for pirates. Robert Gore was part of a Royal Navy task force created to eradicate this menace.
Man the guns!
The word pirates most often brings to mind images of swashbuckling villains from centuries past. But the truth is, pirates are still very much with us. In the past few years, Somali pirates have hijacked hundreds of ships, from sailboats and fishing trawlers to 1,000-foot-long supertankers. Piracy is as lucrative and serious a threat today as it ever was. So how do you wage war on piracy? This is our museum's secret. The investigation begins on the waters of the Gairloch in Scotland, home to Her Majesty's naval base, Clyde. These Royal Marines are the latest in a long tradition of Royal Navy counter-piracy task forces.
The intelligence picture so far, they've seen 4 crew members on the upper deck. No weapons have been sighted. Brief your orders, Rob, at 1000. Any other issues, we'll update you on the
Captain
ground.
Chris Viggers is the second in command of S Squadron 4-3 Commando Fleet Protection Services. His men are training for deployment to the Gulf of Aden, where their job is to combat today's pirates. His squadron is performing an exercise in chasing and boarding a suspected pirate vessel.
Get back! The hook now! Put it down!
A few years ago, they used to just work very close to their coast. They didn't really have the vessels to go out there, but since then, piracy has increased, and they've now got big motherships which are capable of doing long distances.
In the 19th century, the best way to evade pirates was to outrun them. But no ship could sail at full speed all the time. 19th century pirates knew this and would patiently wait for the right opportunity to strike.
They would wait until the ship was becalmed or maybe even temporarily run aground, and then they would dart out from cover, from hiding in their proas, and cluster around the bow and the stern of the ship.
Being overtaken by pirates pretty much always meant death.
When they captured a ship, they either killed the crew or held them prisoner, but if there was any sign of resistance, in no uncertain terms, they made it very clear that they would just carve everyone up and throw them overboard.
By the 1830s, piracy was causing such a disruption to trade in the Straits of Malacca that the Royal Navy were called in to eradicate pirates from the area. Among the officers was Robert Gore.
The gunboat on which Robert Gore was serving, in the course of 6 months from May to September, burnt down 3 so-called pirate villages, killed upwards of 200 pirates, and they lost only 1 man and 17 wounded.
Today, many modern pirates use captured tankers or cargo vessels as their home base. This presents new challenges for Chris Viggers and S Squadron.
We used flashbangs. Basically, that's just a big shock for the entry. So they'll throw a flashbang in, which has 6 loud bangs, which just takes the enemy's mind off anything that we might be doing, or shocks them a little.
For vulnerable ships on the high seas, the same rules apply today that have held for centuries. If you can't outrun the pirates and you can't cut them off at their source, then you have only 2 options left.
Trying to prevent them from boarding you, and obviously fighting back if they come against you. If you fire any shots at them, they'll normally just turn and run.
And if that fails, then just hope that there is a counter-piracy unit working in your area. After all, they've got centuries of experience behind them. Next on Museum Secrets, the secret to controlling 1,000,000 volts of lightning. The tall ships designed for trade, war, and exploration faced many dangers from both sea and land. But with mainmasts reaching as high as 60 meters, they also faced a threat from the sky.
This is one of the mastheads of the great French flagship, the L'Orient, that was destroyed by British warships at the Battle of the Nile in August 1798. At the top, you can see a lightning rod that would have conducted a bolt of lightning right the way down the mast, down through the hull of the ship to the keel, which was several hundred feet below, and then the charge would disperse into the ocean.
The L'Orient was Napoleon's flagship during the French invasion of Egypt. His fleet was confronted one night by Britain's Admiral Nelson. This painting depicts the climax of the battle when the L'Orient caught fire.
There was a colossal explosion which sent a gout of flame high up into the air and also carried chunks of the ship and pieces of wreckage right up into the heavens as well.
This rod was one of the only remnants of the ship to survive the explosion. It was fished out of the water and presented to Admiral Nelson.
We know that Nelson was very fond of this object. His house was completely full of artifacts from battles. It was full of portraits of himself. It was full of paintings of battles. But he kept his lightning conductor by the front door. It was the first thing that you'd see. Now, because it looks curious, I think it was a conversation starter. People said, "What is that? Why have you got it?"
And the conversation continues among scientists today.
I've never seen one which is so blunt. I can't see there's any reason that could have happened in an accident. It looks like somebody has bent it in that fashion. Maybe they had a good reason for it. I don't know.
Modern lightning rods are sharper. So just how effective was this unusually shaped antique one? That is our museum's secret. Our investigation begins at the University of Manchester's High Voltage Lab.
Lightning is likely to hit anything that's tall and anything that's sharp. So if you have, say, a tree, if you have yourself holding an umbrella, if you have a tall building, all of those things could be hit.
The electrical field around tall and sharp objects is intensified and attracts lightning strikes, including, of course, a mast at sea.
Lightning can be 200,000 amps, which is a huge amount of current. It's about the same as 20,000 electric kettles. It's only there for a very, very short time, but it can blow things apart and cause massive damage.
And for the wooden ships of Nelson's era, the threat was even worse.
There was obviously a huge problem with warships because they were made of wood, but also because they were full of gunpowder. If you think about HMS Victory, when she was first commissioned in the 1770s, she had 42,000 pounds of gunpowder on her, which is the equivalent to 25.5 tons of TNT. Now that gets a bit messy if you get struck by lightning.
In 1752, the experiments of American inventor Benjamin Franklin proved that a sharp, pointed rod could be used to attract lightning. But 50 years after Franklin's experiment, the French were still using their own blunt-tipped design. Which brings us back to our museum's secret. How did the blunt lightning rod compare to the sharp lightning rod? Today, Ian will test this for the first time.
You guys got any gaff tape?
This generator will send 1.1 million volts to a hanging electrode, which represents a cloud. Ian is placing the rods at an equal distance from the cloud.
I think what will happen is we'll see that the sharp lightning rod attracts more lightning than the blunt one. And I think we'll show that the French were probably wrong. But they didn't have the knowledge that we have today, that the sharp lightning rod intensifies this electric field around the tip.
That's 2 strikes to the blunt rod. The rods are swapped around to make sure the test is fair. And 1 strike to the sharp rod. Ian is surprised by the results.
And the blunt one again.
Before the tests, I would have assumed that every single lightning strike we saw would have gone to this rod, compared with this rod where there's no real sharpness to it. But obviously, this one must work. Otherwise, you wouldn't see the results that we just saw in the lab.
So the French were onto something with their unconventional design. But one question remains. Why was Nelson so fond of this particular piece?
Nelson may have appreciated that lightning conductor because it was a reminder of the shockingly violent and merciless assault that he launched on the French at the Battle of the Nile in 1798. You see, they had this piece of maritime technology which would protect them from nature's wrath, but they didn't have anything to protect them from the British.
Up next, a harrowing secret of the Franklin expedition, frozen in ice. The National Maritime Museum is home to many artifacts celebrating Britain's greatest maritime explorations. But in the 19th century, there was one region that the British Navy hadn't charted: the Arctic. Determined to discover the elusive Northwest Passage through the Arctic, the British Admiralty mount their most well-equipped expedition to date. The ships are outfitted with steam engines, water filtration systems, extensive libraries, and a recent invention, food preserved in tins. They appoint this man to lead the expedition, Sir John Franklin.
Franklin was an Arctic veteran. He was a survivor. He was someone who had been entrusted with leadership on 2 separate Arctic expeditions in the past. And he was famously an explorer who had eaten his own boots to survive. And this is a testament to his skills in surviving, his skills in getting a job done and in coming back safely.
But Franklin doesn't come back safely. He and his 128 men disappear into the Arctic abyss. After 3 years with no word from the expedition, Britain launches the largest manhunt in history. Finding Franklin becomes a national obsession. Desperate to cover the vast Arctic expanses in their search, the Victorians are inspired by a popular means of travel at the time: the balloon.
This is a communication balloon, and it's made from animal gut and paper, kind of patchwork together. It's stained with what we think is probably blackberry juice to make it very visible against the Arctic landscape.
Released from rescue vessels, these hydrogen balloons carried hundreds of messages on burning fuses, scattering them over a wide area.
These are messages of hope. These are messages telling them that there are people out there looking for them, that there are provisions there for them, that there is hope of survival.
The Victorians dreamed up other creative ways for distributing these messages of hope. These collars were stamped with the coordinates of rescue parties and attached to Arctic foxes in the hope that Franklin's men would discover them.
We also have examples of badges which would be given to Inuit men who traveled through the Arctic. And these badges contain details of the exact location where Franklin's men could find rescue.
But every attempt to make contact with the expedition is met with absolute silence. What happened to Franklin and his men? This is our museum's secret. A clue is discovered 5 years into the search with the discovery of Franklin's first camp on Beechey Island.
There was a coal pile, there was a tin can dump, and there were 3 graves. And these are really the first pieces of evidence of the expedition, and also the first sign that things had gone terribly awry very early on in the expedition.
More clues to the expedition's trail surface farther south, on King William Island. Here, Inuit natives are discovered carrying buttons and other objects from the expedition. The Inuit claim to have acquired the objects from a large group of white men. Motivated by the Inuit testimony, the British send out one last search party in 1859. They strike gold, a cairn with a report inside filled out by one of Franklin's officers 2 years into the expedition.
The form was filled out saying that everything was going well on the expedition up until May 1847, and then squeezed around the edge in tiny, desperate handwriting is the tale that John Franklin had died and that the men that were remaining, stuck in the ice, decided to head southwards for the Fish River to see if they could find provisions and help.
And so Britain had her answer. Franklin was dead. The fate of the rest of his men was a mystery, lost in the ice. The search was called off. But great mysteries never die. And in the 1980s, Canadian forensic anthropologist Owen Beattie resurrected the old obsession, relocating the human remains.
I don't think he was prepared for what he encountered on Beach Island, though, which was a level of preservation that was astonishing. It looked like these men had just died.
The men had died of pneumonia, and their tissue and bone showed dramatically high levels of lead poisoning. Which brings us back to that recent invention, canned food.
I've held some of those tin cans, and the lead is on the inside of the seams, and it drips like candle wax.
After 3 years of consuming the lead-poisoned food, Franklin's men would have been in terrible mental and physical shape. Desperate to seek food and rescue, the men left their ships and headed south. Owen Beattie followed the men's trail on King William Island, and here he made a grisly discovery.
That's where a tent circle was located, and around the outside of that tent circle was a scatter of human remains.
Among the remains were a smashed-in skull and a femur with unusual cut marks.
They were marks that had been cut using a metal knife, and they're really evidence of defleshing. They're butcher marks. So whoever was doing this was literally, cutting off the muscle, trying to get access to the flesh. The skull was smashed in. There were fracture lines, and so the teeth and the face were missing. So it's clearly there was an effort to access the brain, likely as a food source.
But the skeleton wasn't complete. It appeared that the bones of the heavier part of the body, the torso, had been left somewhere else.
The portable parts of the easily portable parts of the body, the legs, the arms, and the skull were carried along, almost like takeaway food, to put it crudely. And these surviving crewmen then reached this point, built their camp, and had a meal.
The fate of the Franklin expedition marked the end of Britain's great legacy of conquest over the seas. The Arctic had become the last and most unforgiving frontier. In this place where empire and exploration meet, for every mystery we reveal, far more must remain unspoken. Tales of high seas triumph and icebound tragedy. Secrets hidden in plain sight inside the National Maritime Museum.